All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined from the other side of the country, in the DC area, western Northern Virginia, by Duane Deason. How you doing, Duane?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Duane is the president of the Efficacy Group, where he helps organizations lower costs, strengthen profitability, and upgrade operational efficiency. You've held chief financial officer, chief procurement officer jobs, so you bring a lot of wealth of experience in this area. And that's what we're going to talk about today is why most cost management efforts fail and what leaders overlook. And let's face it, Duane, we're in a period now, and it certainly has happened over the last number of years when cost management has become a big issue. Even before people were, when the economy is exuberant, when money's cheap, when VCs and everybody's just spending money and it's fantastic, and it's all growth at any cost. And then suddenly reality comes knocking on the door, and it's about path to profitability and all of that. And so people go, shoot, I got to go into cost cutting mode now. What typically happens next?
Well, that's one of the problems that I try to address is what happens when they all of a sudden have to do that quick shift is it's like unfamiliar territory. They don't
Yep.
know what to do. It's deer in the headlights moment. And what they do is they target the easiest the target, which is really headcount. So
Yep.
immediately they say, okay, we're going to have to let people go, and that's usually the place I go to last because if
Hmm.
you start with headcount, you get into a little bit of a death spiral where you let people go. Now you have less people to manage the business and serve customers. And so what happens? Well, you have less sales and less revenue, and so you continue to decline in performance. And then you decide, okay, well, we need to cut costs again, and so they let people go again. And
Hmm.
really, what I recommend is, and it does take more time, but I take a comprehensive look from head to toe on where we're spending money, how can that be done more efficiently, and I take a more methodology, a better methodology to approach those cost reductions.
Yeah,
So
I was going to say, because particularly if a company isn't doing this on a regular basis or doesn't have it built into their DNA that they like are always looking at efficiency and costs and all of that, you can have so many hidden costs within a business, or or costs that are never allocated properly. So the real cost of things is never calculated.
I totally agree. And what happens, because you mentioned before about there's periods of time when everyone's feeling flush and feeling
Hmm.
good. And during those times, they don't manage the business properly. They don't build a strong foundation, and a large amount of bloat creeps in, and that really impacts the organization. A bloated organization can't innovate well. It can't serve its customers well. It's not fair to the shareholders or the employees. So it's really important that you try to stay lean even during the good times.
Yeah, and that takes like an organizational philosophy, as we said. I mean, that takes it coming from the top, because, like we said, especially when times are good, you can get into really, really bad habits that
Yep.
become that can become big cost impacts. Like if you get into the habit of you just have inefficient processes, to get in the habit of shipping things overnight and stuff like that. I remember one company I was with, that was a killer. That was something I had to put a stop to, and I realized, I was like, why is this shipping costing so much? And then I realized it's because we're forgetting things and shipping them at the last moment overnight, which
Yep.
is killing the profitability of the projects.
Yes, yes. And I'll also say that one of the problems starts at the top, as you mentioned, is really that companies are usually led by visionaries. And one of
Hmm.
the problems with visionaries is they tend to really like other visionaries, and so they hire a whole management team of visionaries,
Hmm.
and that doesn't really leave anyone that manages the business well. And so I do caution business owners and CEOs to try to hire a well-rounded and diverse group of employees and management teams so that you can handle all aspects of the business.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's it's a really good point, because operational people tend to be kind of chalk and cheese to visionaries, right?
Right.
But you need the operational people in order to actually make the
Absolutely.
vision sustainable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen a lot of companies struggle on that end, and it comes back to bite them a little bit. And they don't. And those same visionaries, when they do get into trouble, they're not very good at right sizing the company and controlling costs and switching into a new frame of mind, because that's really not what they were ever good at. And so
Mhm.
it's almost unrealistic to ask for a visionary to shift gears and become an operator, overnight. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting the point you made, because I agree with it. It's just like when times are good, people tend to companies tend to scale by people as opposed to scale by process and stuff. They just
Yeah,
start throwing headcount at it. And when times are bad, as you said, they do the same except in the opposite direction. They cull the headcount. Because as you said, it always appears on paper, like when you look at your P&L, well, it's the easiest one to address because
yeah,
the other ones may take a little bit more effort.
that's
But
right.
there's so much, I mean, you would know better than I, but there's so much hidden in those other numbers.
No, I totally agree with you. And the head count can be off the books within a couple weeks. You
Yeah.
you target a certain number, you tell people that that's the target they have to hit, and then they're by the end of the month they're gone, and it's completely done. And I can see the temptation of it, but it cripples an organization. And I think that if you have the time and if you can start early, and you really even should have some contingency plans already in place for those bad times. A lot of companies, because they're just feeling like they're doing well, they don't do much contingency planning. You know how banks now do those stress tests. Well, your company should have a stress test in some ways. And what will you do if you miss your sales target by 5-10%? If your cash flow gets tight, have those steps already in place, already thought about before you're in panic mode.
Yeah. So what are some of the areas that you think people often overlook that should be some of the first places they go looking to make sure there's no bloat?
Well, I always start with G&A because no
Yeah.
one misses G&A. So it's an easy area to begin with, build up confidence within an organization. But what I'm advocating for is that all cost management efforts, much like a sales team's consolidated, has goals and expectations. It's a very clear structure. Whereas I think it should be the same for the cost management team. An organization shouldn't have its cost management efforts dispersed throughout the organization. It should be centralized, and they should have specific goals for the organization. They should have a uniform methodology for tracking and reporting savings. And then I think as a result of that, you get an area that you're now applying consistent results to all the areas within a company. And once I've looked at G&A and I've scrubbed it, then we just move on to other areas. And usually, a company knows they when they've called me, they know where they're already weak, and so they
Mhm.
direct me to those areas. But if not, I slowly just move into other areas whether it's technology is always a big opportunity, and I marketing, is something that I always work very closely with the marketing team in order to try to see if we can do better on their efforts and make sure that they're accountable and having measurements of results. Um, and uh, and I think we have good results across the board, but probably G&A is one of the bigger ones. Technology is another one.
Yeah, and especially nowadays because it's quite common to have lots of people have because you have SaaS models, lots of people to have signed up for lots of different technologies
Yeah,
and companies be paying out a lot of money for technologies that either they're not using or they're only using a little bit or they used to use, and
yeah.
they just sit there. I mean, it's like your personal subscriptions, isn't it? Like to streaming services and stuff like that. You forget about them if you're not paying attention. It's the same thing in companies. How often do you come across companies still paying for subscriptions or technologies or things that they're either not using or that they hardly use?
Oh, quite a bit. In fact, there's a huge amount of overlap often where somebody comes in and they love this tool, and so
Hmm.
they insist on getting that tool, even though the company has something similar already. And then particularly under acquisitions, where you
Yeah.
come in and you have a whole technology stack at a different company, and some of that's very well integrated into that acquisition company. And so you don't want to, or it gets very complicated if you try to strip that quickly. And what becomes the easy answer is they just leave it alone. And so you end up with permanent redundancy in your technology stack, and that takes a lot of people to try to manage. But I'd have a utilization is one of my biggest areas where I
Hmm.
find that there is a lot of licenses on the shelf, where the company was optimistic when it originally thought it would need a certain amount of licenses. And so all I do is I run the last report of when's the last time people accessed the application.
Right.
And you find out that people that are signed licenses, 30-40% of them haven't been in the application for 4 months. And they probably don't need a license. And so you can really cut back. But utilization is a major area of that I find savings in.
Yeah. And why is it, Dwayne, that a lot of people just don't have a cost management mentality? I mean, it just seems to be like I said, a lot of people just don't have that kind of mentality,
Yeah.
and especially in a business where they may be very frugal and everything in their own personal lives, but they come into a business and they just lose the run of themselves.
Yeah, I think a little bit of that is that we're optimists at
Mhm.
kind of at our particularly leadership. They're optimists, and and that because of that, they cost controlling costs is kind of not looked at it as an optimistic philosophy, I guess.
Mhm.
And they're always going to do well. Why would we have to look at costs? But I think it goes a little deeper than that, where most employees live paycheck to paycheck and aren't very good managing their own money,
Yeah.
and they bring that to they bring that to the office. And I always kind of joke is that if you think you want your employees to spend your money, your company's money, like it's their own,
Yeah.
you
Be
ought to
careful.
be careful what you wish for, because they don't have a great track record in that regard. Uh,
You
yeah,
could
so
find your company credit card maxed out very fast.
That's right. That's right. And I think they can learn. In fact, one of the things I preach is that for a culture of cost awareness, and if you train employees and teach them what you need, they absolutely can learn. And if you start rewarding employees that who do cost saving effort, that find something and execute on that on their own, and then you give them both a financial reward for that, word will get out. You at the next
Mhm.
company meeting, you announce what they did, explain the project, you're starting to reinforce what the company is looking for. And so you build that culture of cost awareness. So I do think it's reversible if you have a problem with that within your company.
No, I would agree. It's something I did at a company I was running for a while, Hathwaite, and
Mm,
one of the things was that the salespeople, obviously they've got commission, so they've got their variable comp, so they got could earn, but the people on the delivery side, the operations delivery people, like they're just basic salary. So what I did was said, okay, here's our operating profit target for this year. If
yeah.
we exceed this, you guys on the operations and delivery side are going to earn a bonuses based on anything
Mhm,
above what we did, right? So what it turned out then was they started challenging the salespeople on the gross profit margins of their business. They
mhm,
started challenging them on, why are you you've sold the deal, why do you want me to send this extra stuff now, because that's going to cost the company x amount. And it created a fantastic dynamic where now you had a group of people who were incented on cost savings, and boy did they go find them.
yeah. No, and I really appreciate when leaders do those type of things, because a lot of times I'm viewed as an ogre that comes in and I'm
Yeah.
trying to make them, manage their budgets better or manage costs better. And when I have that type of framework, it's all of a sudden now I'm an ally. I'm
Yeah.
helping them reach their goals and objectives that will make them more money and get them bonuses. And so it's really helpful when leadership does a program like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a they have an urban legend back then that they used to have to ask sister companies for post-it notes because their CEO was too mean to pay for anything.
Well, you're gonna get me teary-eyed because I appreciate that. I appreciate
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, it is something that requires like a leadership mentality to
Yeah,
get it out to the organization that this is important. And like you said, unfortunately, I mean, not fortunately, but a lot of founders and stuff, are visionaries and stuff. So this isn't the stuff that really interests them. So
yeah.
the best thing to do is to find somebody who's really good at this, who you trust.
Yes, and I think one of the things you have to remind leadership about is that when a company first started out, it was lean and mean and probably was the greatest at serving its customers,
Yep.
at innovation and operating. So it being lean is actually part of your success model. The more you try to feed a company cash to solve problems, they just get bloated and are less successful. You start seeing silos get built, you start seeing less productivity, you start seeing more employees that aren't doing that much, which can be very contagious.
Yeah.
And so you really ought to try to stay lean for your own success. It's going to help the company grow.
And by the way, now you've got so many different options to do that, because what you just said there a moment ago about people not doing very much. As
Mhm.
I said, when times are good, what do we tend to do? We say, "Oh, I'm too busy. We need somebody to do this. So we go onto the internet and we grab some job description that sounds like the job that we want, we
Yep.
or the role that we need. We bring them on board, we hire them, and then about 6 months later, we discover that we really only have about half, or we only have 50% work to give them. So we
Yeah.
just start giving them stuff. And before you know it, you have all these people in your company who are really doing half a job, and you're just making busy work the rest of the time. Nowadays, with all this contracting, remote resources,
Mhm.
fractional people, is you don't need to do that. You don't need you can hire somebody for the exact amount of time that you need, and probably get somebody with greater level of expertise.
Yep, and I see a lot with consultants the same way you're describing, where someone new starts, the first thing they do when they want to come in and they were hired for a job is
Mhm.
they want to go out and hire either more employees to do that job or consultants to do that job. And
Yep.
so, it starts becoming, it feeds itself where, when one new employee all of a sudden creates like 3x the cost of that employee because
Yeah.
they want their own team surrounding them to do whatever project is assigned them.
Yeah, and we love the middle management tier, right? We love,
Yeah.
like, oh, there's three people. One of them needs to be a team leader now, and then
Yeah.
there's two teams now. Somebody needs to be the leader of both teams. And all this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I know. I very, yeah. Of course, cutting out layers within an organization is always wise, not only for cost, but it's because it increases communication and collaboration. Because the amount of distance between the entry level employee and the leadership is much shorter than if you have several layers of management in there, and the noise just creates confusion and less productivity.
Yeah, and obviously nowadays, Duane, the ability to be able to do kind of virtual or remote organizations
Mhm.
and work that. I mean, there's a lot of those costs that you don't need to incur anymore that you once upon a time did.
Yeah, as long as you can find a way to hold people accountable,
Hmm.
because I think one of the things that happened with when we went remote, and it happened so suddenly, is that there wasn't really a good mechanism of tracking people, and that was fine. It worked out fine when you already knew your team, you already
Yeah.
knew what they were doing. But as you grow and you introduce new players into your team, I think you lose that insight into what they're working on. So as long as you have a way of monitoring productivity and results, I think it can work very well. If you don't, and you need a tighter knit team, I don't know if remote teams work as well in that circumstance, because it can impact collaboration, innovation, and those other, and even culture if you in some circumstances. So you have to find the right balance.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely, and you do, and you need to find the right balance. You need to find the right people, and you have to have you have to have the right culture for this to operate. And yeah, but it certainly does give you that opportunity that you never had before to run a much more lean organization than perhaps you once upon a time were able to do.
Yeah, and if you don't do it at the beginning, it will haunt you because it doesn't get better naturally. Then you end up calling someone like myself in and to try to help with the company at a later date, and that can be, at that point you've already really lost some of the momentum that you could have had, and you have to always consider that your competitors are operating leaner. And are
Mm.
if someone else always on your heels that may be doing it right, and so you might as well get it right up front, be lean, be efficient in your operations, and it will actually increase your performance and innovation.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, I mean, there are so many hidden costs in the business. I think that sometimes people just aren't aware of, or they're not allocated properly. It's like all those, because we started doing that when we're doing those kind of gross
Yeah.
margins, even on sales. Started going, oh no, you borrowed somebody for half a day to do this. I'm allocating that cost now to this. So look at your gross profit margin is actually way lower than you presented it as.
Yes, and I don't think that you should. When I look at costs, that's one of the things that actually hides costs is that you'll have one cost that is allocated among eight
Yeah.
departments, and so it doesn't raise a flag to any one department because it's relatively small. But
Mhm.
when you add up the different eight components and realize it's actually quite a large cost, so you're better off looking at where's the cash going, who are you paying, and
Mhm.
then you know where your biggest expenses are. Of course, payroll is always on the top, but you'd be surprised on where it can be anything from office space to technology aspects of it, and just make sure you understand what that consolidated cost looks like, and go after your biggest targets and see if you can do better.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it should be something because sometimes you just get used to a P&L, right? You just get
Yep.
used to those
Yep.
numbers, and they're just familiar, and you don't dig into them as much as you used to because it's kind of the same numbers coming out every month, and therefore and it's only when there's a crisis then you suddenly start going, oh, quickly, I better this number looks big. How can we get this down?
Yeah, and that's one of my gripes I have with budgets as well, because they operate the same way, is
Hmm.
that there's an inertia to them. Is
Yeah.
that whatever was last month's budget or last year's budget, it kind of almost rolls over, and
Yeah.
that becomes your starting point. And there's no necessarily correlation with it being cost efficient.
Hmm.
It's just not last year's numbers, and you're really inherited someone else's problems from 2 or 3 years ago that wasn't operating efficiently. So
Yeah.
I do think you have to be kind of like careful on that end.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an excellent point there that you just made, just to finish. And I think it's a really, really good point. Is just because that's the way it's always looked doesn't mean that's the way it has to look. Just because those are the components you've had then in there all the time. Because
Yep.
let's face it, when you're doing budgets and stuff, it's normally you're under a time pressure. You've also maybe you've got the end of the year coming up at the same time you're doing budgets for next year and stuff.
Yep.
And it's very tempting to just, rinse and repeat from last year.
Yeah, and particularly if you've cut down on staff, what happens is they don't have the bandwidth anymore because you've now starved them from resources, and they can't attack those other problems that might have been on their list to go after, or even have the time to really examine those and
True.
drill down. And as a result, they just kind of continue on. So it's another reason just to be careful is if you're cutting headcount is your first priority. It does hurt the organization's ability to be able to do other cost saving efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thanks, Duane. All of Duane's information will be below this video. But before we go, please do remind people about what you do.
So I help companies manage costs, and on my website, efficacygroup.com, I offer a free consultation if people want to stop over and just talk about their business and issues they're having. I always enjoy those discussions and meeting new business owners and leadership. And when I always walk away, the company is always operating more efficiently than when I got there, and it's I really enjoy what I do.
Excellent, excellent. And I would encourage people to go check it out. To tell you efficiency, you'd be amazed with a focus on efficiency, what it can do for your business, what it can do for your profitability, what it can just do for everything going forward. So I would encourage you to go check out Duane's work and maybe make 2026 the year of efficiency for your organization. So thanks again, Duane. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you all again very soon.